I'm Sophia Mitchell, 28 years old, and my life changed forever when I inherited my grandfather Harold's supposedly worthless property. Everyone in my family dismissed the old garage as junk, not worth the hassle of clearing out, but something inside me couldn't let it go. The moment I pushed open that rusty door, I discovered my grandfather had been keeping secrets his entire life, secrets that powerful people would do anything to keep buried. If you're watching this, drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from. Hit that like and subscribe button, and get ready for a story about the incredible legacy hidden behind a facade of peeling paint and cobwebs. 6 months ago, I was a struggling graphic designer in Chicago, living paycheck to paycheck while trying to build a portfolio impressive enough to land a stable position. My tiny apartment doubled as my workspace, which was really just a fancy way of saying they were cutting costs by eliminating junior positions like mine. The timing couldn't have been worse. The job market for designers was saturated, and my savings were dwindling faster than I could replenish them with freelance gigs. My parents, both practical-minded accountants, hadn't hidden their disappointment when I chose to pursue art school instead of business. "We just want you to be able to support yourself, Sophia," my mother would say during our increasingly tense phone calls. "There's still time to get a degree in something with actual job prospects. The world needs beauty and new ideas just as much as it needs tax returns," he'd tell me, his blue eyes twinkling behind wire-rimmed glasses. Every birthday, he'd send art supplies instead of practical gifts, and during summer visits to his small home in Oak Ridge, he'd take me to local galleries and museums. When the call came that he had passed away peacefully in his sleep at 87, I felt like I'd lost my biggest champion. The funeral was small but dignified, just as he would have wanted. Afterward, the family gathered at my Aunt Lydia's house for the reading of the will. Nobody expected much. Grandpa Harold had lived modestly as a mechanic in the same small house for over 50 years. To my granddaughter Sophia Mitchell, I leave my property at 1423 Pinecrest Road, including the house, garage, and all contents therein. They had always treated Grandpa Harold with a mixture of affection and mild condescension, as if he were a lovable but impractical dreamer. What did surprise me was that he had left me his entire property instead of dividing it among all his grandchildren. "There must be some mistake," my cousin Melissa said with a tight smile. "Grandpa always said he would divide everything equally." The lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, adjusted his glasses. Mr. Mitchell was very clear about his wishes. "With my career at a standstill and my bank account dwindling, perhaps this inheritance was the fresh start I needed. Maybe I could renovate the house, turn it into a live workspace, or even sell it eventually for enough money to fund a career pivot." 2 weeks later, I packed my compact Honda with everything I could fit: clothes, my computer, basic art supplies, abandoning city life for a small town where I knew almost no one. What if the house was completely uninhabitable? What if this was just another impulsive decision that would end in failure? Proving my parents right once again? By the time I pulled onto Pinecrest Road, my confidence had dwindled considerably. The neighborhood was quiet and obviously aging, with modest homes built in the 50s and 60s. Some had been well maintained or updated, while others showed their age with peeling paint and outdated features, suggesting that someone had been maintaining it minimally since his death. It wasn't the disaster my family had described, but it would definitely require work to make it comfortable. And then there was the garage. Set apart from the house at the back of the property, the detached two-car garage was indeed in rough shape. What had once been white paint had mostly flaked away. It looked like the kind of structure that might collapse if you slammed the door too hard. "Well," I said aloud to myself as I turned off the engine, "at least they weren't exaggerating about that part." A wave of uncertainty washed over me as I sat in my car, staring at my inheritance. Had I made a terrible mistake? Should I just sell the property as is and go back to Chicago with whatever money I could get? But something about giving up without even properly exploring what Grandpa Harold had left me felt wrong. He had specifically chosen to leave this place to me, not my cousins or my parents. There had to be a reason. I grabbed my overnight bag from the passenger seat and approached the house, fishing out the keys Mr. Abernathy had given me. Despite my family's doom and gloom predictions, the house was in better condition inside than out. The furniture was outdated and the decor hadn't been changed since probably the early 90s, but it was clean and sturdy. The electricity worked, the plumbing functioned, and there was no obvious structural damage. After a quick tour of the modest two-bedroom house, I found myself drawn to the window that overlooked the backyard and the dilapidated garage. I suspected the answer might be found in that weathered building. The next morning, after a surprisingly restful sleep in my grandfather's old bedroom, I decided it was time to tackle the garage. Armed with a flashlight, work gloves, and a bandana to cover my nose and mouth against the inevitable dust, I made my way across the overgrown backyard. Close. The garage looked even more decrepit. Boards had warped, nails were rusting out of their holes, and what remained of the paint was curling away from the wood like dried skin. The padlock on the door was so rusted that I wondered if the key would even work. "Please don't be filled with raccoons," I muttered as I wiggled the key into the lock. It took some jiggling and a liberal application of WD-40 I'd found in the kitchen, but eventually, the lock turned with a grating sound of metal against metal. The hasp was so corroded that I had to yank it several times before it released. When it finally gave way, I nearly fell backward from the sudden release of tension. The door protested with a dramatic creak as I pulled it open, sending a shower of dust and paint flakes raining down. Sunlight streamed through the grimy windows and the crack in the door, and the miscellaneous debris that accumulates over decades. An ancient lawnmower sat in one corner, partially disassembled. Shelves lined the walls, sagging under the weight of paint cans, jars filled with nails and screws, and cardboard boxes with faded labels. The concrete floor was stained with oil and paint, telling the story of countless projects begun and completed within these walls. But as my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I began to notice something odd. Despite the layer of dust covering everything, there was a sense of organization to the chaos. Tools were grouped by type, boxes were labeled with neat handwriting, and there was a clear path through the clutter. This wasn't the garage of someone who simply tossed things inside to be forgotten. This was the space of someone who knew exactly where everything was. In the center of the garage stood a large workbench, its surface barely visible beneath a covering of dust and scattered objects. I approached it cautiously, sweeping aside cobwebs with a broom I'd found leaning against the wall. As I cleared the surface, I discovered a meticulously organized workspace. Screwdrivers were arranged by size, wrenches hung on a custom-made rack, and a magnifying lamp was positioned perfectly at the corner of the bench. "This doesn't make sense," I said aloud, my voice sounding muffled in the dust-filled air. My grandfather had clearly cared deeply about this workspace, yet had allowed the exterior of the garage to fall into such disrepair. It was almost as if he wanted the garage to look abandoned and unimportant from the outside. As I continued to explore the workbench, I examined it more closely and found a nearly invisible seam. When I applied gentle pressure to one corner, the panel popped open, revealing a hidden drawer. Inside was a stack of leather-bound journals, at least a dozen of them, their spines labeled with years spanning from 1972 to 2022. With trembling hands, I lifted out the most recent one and opened it to the first page. "The work continues despite setbacks. They think I've given up, which gives me the freedom to continue without interference. If I can complete the prototype before time runs out, Sophia will have everything she needs to finish what I started." My name, written in my grandfather's precise handwriting, jumped off the page, and references to projects with names like Horizon, Aurora, and Daybreak. Further exploration of the hidden drawer revealed a folded blueprint. I carefully spread it out on the cleared workbench, using tools to weight down the corners. It showed detailed plans for some kind of device, with components I couldn't identify and annotations in my grandfather's handwriting that referenced principles of physics I had never studied. "What were you working on, Grandpa?" I whispered, running my fingers over the faded blue lines of the drawing. The more I explored, the more questions arose. Behind a stack of seemingly random boxes, I discovered a steel door set into the back wall of the garage. It had no visible handle or lock, just a small keypad mounted at eye level. Unlike everything else in the garage, this door and its electronic lock looked well-maintained and modern. I tried pushing it, but it didn't budge. I examined the keypad, but without knowing the code, there was no way to open whatever lay beyond. I returned to the journals, hoping to find clues about the mysterious door or the code that might open it. Hours passed as I became absorbed in my grandfather's writings. The sun began to set, casting the garage into deeper shadow, but I barely noticed as I moved from one journal to another, piecing together a picture of a man I had apparently never truly known. According to his journals, Harold Mitchell hadn't been merely a mechanic. He had been a brilliant engineer who had worked on classified government projects in the 1960s and 70s before abruptly leaving to open his small-town repair shop. The journals hinted at ethical disagreements with his superiors and a determination to use his knowledge for humanitarian purposes rather than military applications. The most recent journals described his work on an invention he believed could revolutionize clean energy production, something he called Project Horizon. But they also contained troubling references to unnamed individuals or organizations that had tried to stop his work, forcing him to continue in secret. By the time I reached the last entry, dated just 2 weeks before his death, night had fallen completely. I read by the beam of my flashlight, goosebumps rising on my arms despite the garage's stuffy warmth. If you're reading this, Sophia, then my time has run out. I've left everything you'll need to understand and continue my work. Trust no one until you've seen it all for yourself. The code is your birthday, the day you brought light into my world. I sat back on the dusty stool, my mind reeling. The grandfather I thought I knew, the kind, somewhat eccentric old man who fixed cars and encouraged my artistic endeavors, had been living a double life. And now, for reasons I couldn't yet understand, he had passed his secrets on to me. Questions tumbled through my mind. What exactly had my grandfather invented? Why had he kept it secret? And why had he chosen me, an artist with no scientific background, to inherit his work? More insistent this time, followed by a voice calling my name. Sophia, we know you're in there. Open up. I recognized my Uncle Robert's commanding tone immediately. Groaning, I pulled on jeans and a sweater, quickly ran a brush through my tangled hair, and hurried to the door. When I opened it, I found Uncle Robert and my cousin Jackson standing on the porch, both looking surprised to see me. So you really are staying here, Uncle Robert said, his disapproval evident in the downward turn of his mouth. He was my father's older brother, he said, offering a small wave. We were in the area and thought we'd stop by to see if you needed any help. At 9 in the morning? Without calling first? Asked. Not bothering to hide my skepticism, Uncle Robert pushed past me into the house, looking around with critical eyes. We've been trying to call. You haven't been answering your phone. I checked my phone and saw 3 missed calls from Jackson. I was tired from the drive and unpacking. I turned the ringer off. Well, we're here now, Uncle Robert said, moving further into the living room. Jackson and I thought we'd help you clear out some of this old stuff. The sooner you can get the place ready to list, the better. My defenses immediately went up. I never said I was selling. Uncle Robert turned to me with an expression of exaggerated patience, as if explaining something to a child. Sophia, be realistic. You can't afford to maintain this property. The taxes alone will eat up whatever savings you have. Not to mention the repairs needed. He gestured toward the window that faced the backyard. That garage is a liability. One strong storm and it could collapse completely. I'm still figuring things out, I said firmly. I appreciate your concern, but I don't need help clearing anything out right now. Jackson had wandered into the kitchen and was opening cupboards. Dad, there's a lot of good stuff here. Some of these tools in the kitchen are vintage. They might be worth something to collectors. A surge of possessiveness washed over me. I'm not getting rid of anything until I've had a chance to go through it all properly. Uncle Robert's gaze sharpened. Have you been out to the garage yet? Find anything interesting? Something in his tone made me wary. The journals I'd discovered were still in the garage, except for the one I'd brought into the house, which was now hidden under my pillow. Uncle Robert was already moving toward the back door. Your grandfather promised me some of his old tools years ago. I'd like to see if they're still there. I stepped quickly to block his path. Actually, I do mind. Like I said, I want to go through everything myself first. Once I've sorted it all out, you're welcome to come back. Uncle Robert's face flushed with anger. Now listen here. I countered, feeling my own anger rising. And Grandpa was mentally sharp until the very end. Mr. Abernathy confirmed that. You'd listen to the people who actually know about real estate and finance. This place is a money pit. And whatever sentimental attachment you think you have to it isn't worth the financial burden. Jackson stepped between us, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating tension. Dad, maybe we should come back another time. Sophia just got here yesterday. She needs time to settle in. Uncle Robert ignored him, his gaze fixed on me. What did you find in that garage, Sophia? Harold was hiding something out there. We all knew it. So that was it. Something that could be worth a lot of money to the right people. I crossed my arms. If you know so much about it, why don't you tell me what I'm supposed to be looking for? If you found anything unusual, technical documents or prototypes, you could be getting yourself into something dangerous. Is that a threat? I asked quietly. Jackson looked alarmed. No, of course it's not a threat. Dad's just concerned. He turned to his father. We should go. This isn't helping anyone. Uncle Robert hesitated, clearly frustrated at being thwarted. Finally, he jabbed a finger in my direction. This isn't over. That garage and everything in it should have gone to someone who understands its value. I'll be back with my lawyer. Fine, I said, holding my ground. In the meantime, please leave my property. After a tense moment, Uncle Robert stormed out the front door. Jackson lingered, looking apologetic. I'm sorry about that, he said quietly. Dad's been obsessed with whatever Grandpa was working on for years. I don't think even he knows exactly what it is. You could have warned me, I said. Jackson nodded. You're right. Just be careful, okay? Dad might be overreacting, but Grandpa was definitely hiding something. People used to come by the house late at night for meetings in that garage. Dad tried to get me to spy on them, once when I was staying here during high school. This was news to me. What kind of people? I don't know. Men in suits mostly. Very serious types. Not the kind of people you'd expect a small-town mechanic to be meeting with. He glanced toward the door where his father had exited. I should go. He'll be furious if I keep him waiting. The confrontation had left me shaken, but it had also confirmed that there was something significant in the garage. Something valuable enough that my uncle had been coveting it for years. Relief washing over me at the sound of her familiar voice. You won't believe what's happening. For the next 20 minutes, I filled her in on everything, the inheritance, the journals, the secret door, and now my uncle's suspicious behavior. Whoa, Taylor said when I finally paused for breath. Your grandfather was a secret genius inventor. And your uncle is trying to steal his work? This is like a movie plot. I know it sounds crazy, I admitted, but you should have seen Uncle Robert's face. I need to get that door open. Grandpa's last journal entry said the code is my birthday, but I tried it this morning after Uncle Robert left, and it didn't work. What format did you try? But the actual day of the week or time of day? I hadn't considered that. I was born on a Tuesday, I think, and it was early morning around 5:30 a.m. Try 0530, Taylor suggested. Worth a shot, I said. But even if I get the door open, I still don't understand why Grandpa left all this to me. I'm a graphic designer, not an engineer or scientist. Maybe he trusted you more than anyone else, Taylor said simply. Or maybe he thought you were the only one who wouldn't immediately try to profit from whatever he was working on. Then I had a responsibility to at least try to understand what he'd created. I couldn't do it alone, though. I needed someone with technical knowledge. Before Uncle Robert returned with his lawyer or took more drastic measures, I found a phone book in a kitchen drawer and flipped to the section for locksmiths. There were only 2 listed for the entire area. I called the first one, Oak Ridge Lock and Key, and explained that I needed help with an electronic keypad lock. Can you come out today? I asked. It's somewhat urgent. Let me check my schedule, the man on the other end said. There was a pause and the sound of pages turning. I can be there around 3 this afternoon. Would that work? That would be perfect, I said, relief flooding through me. The address is 1423 Pinecrest Road. There was a notable pause. Harold Mitchell's place? Yes, I confirmed. He was my grandfather. I inherited the property. I see, the man said, his tone shifting slightly. I knew Harold. I'm Ethan Williams, by the way. I'll see you at 3. As I hung up, I wondered about the change in his voice when I mentioned my grandfather. Had he been one of the complicated people Uncle Robert had referred to? Or was he simply surprised to learn of a local resident's passing? Either way, in a few hours I would hopefully have access to whatever lay behind that steel door. And perhaps answers to the growing mystery surrounding my grandfather's secret work. A man in his mid-30s with sandy brown hair and practical work clothes stepped out, toolbox in hand. He approached with a friendly but slightly cautious smile. Ms. Mitchell? I'm Ethan Williams. Please call me Sophia, I said, shaking his hand. Thanks for coming on such short notice. No problem. His eyes drifted to the garage behind me. So what kind of lock are we dealing with? I led him across the yard, explaining as we went. It's an electronic keypad on a door inside the garage. I've tried several possible combinations but nothing's worked. Ethan nodded, his expression neutral. Harold was always security conscious. Not surprising he'd have something like that. We reached the garage and I pushed open the main door, which I'd left unlocked after my morning exploration. Ethan paused just inside, looking around with interest. Hasn't changed much, he commented. Not something you'd typically find in a residential setting. Can you open it? Possibly. These systems usually have a manual override or reset function for maintenance. He set down his toolbox and began examining the keypad more closely. Mind if I ask why it's so urgent to get this open today? I hesitated, unsure how much to share with a stranger. But something about Ethan's genuine manner and his connection to my grandfather made me decide to trust my instincts. My Uncle Robert showed up this morning, very interested in what might be in this garage. He seemed to know Grandpa was working on something valuable, and he wasn't happy when I wouldn't let him search the place. Ethan's expression darkened. Robert Mitchell. Yeah, I know him. Not a fan. He turned back to the keypad. Your grandfather mentioned him a few times. Never positively. As Ethan worked, Harold was definitely considered eccentric, but he was also respected. He could fix anything mechanical, never overcharged, and was always willing to help in an emergency. He glanced up at me. There were rumors, though, about his past, about the people who sometimes visited him late at night. What kind of rumors? That he used to work for the government on classified projects. That he knew things others didn't. Ethan carefully attached 2 wires from a device in his toolkit to the exposed circuitry. Small towns run on gossip, but in Harold's case, I always thought there might be some truth to it. He knew too much about too many things to be just a small-town mechanic. The device in Ethan's hand beeped, and he nodded with satisfaction. Almost there. This should trigger the emergency override. He pressed a sequence of buttons, and there was a soft click from inside the door. That's it. Try pushing on the door now. I placed my palms against the cool metal and pushed. With surprising smoothness, the door swung inward, revealing a dark space beyond. Ethan produced a flashlight from his belt and handed it to me. Ladies first, he said with a gesture that was half teasing, half respectful. It's your inheritance, after all. Heart pounding with anticipation, I stepped through the doorway and switched on the flashlight. The beam illuminated what appeared to be a short hallway leading to another door. This one had no visible lock, just a simple handle. I turned it, and the door opened into darkness. There should be a light switch, Ethan said from behind me, probably just inside the door on the right. I felt along the wall and found a switch plate. When I flipped it, overhead lights flickered on, revealing a space that made me gasp audibly. Unlike the cluttered, dusty garage we had just left, this hidden room was immaculate and startlingly modern. It was at least twice the size of the visible garage, extending back into what should have been the neighbor's property. The walls were lined with gleaming metal shelves holding neatly organized equipment, books, and labeled containers. In the center stood several workstations with computer monitors, precision tools. I moved further into the room, my shock giving way to awe. One entire wall was dedicated to a massive whiteboard covered in complex equations and diagrams. Another held framed photographs and certificates, My grandfather with various distinguished-looking individuals, standing in front of government buildings or research facilities. Awards for engineering excellence and innovation. Diplomas and credentials I had never known he possessed. Harold Mitchell, Ph.D. in Applied Physics from MIT 1968. I read from one frame, my voice faint with disbelief. Special Commendation for Service to Advanced Research Projects Agency, 1974. ARPA, Ethan said, examining the certificate. That's the predecessor to DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. They develop cutting-edge technology for military applications. He looked at me with newfound respect. Your grandfather wasn't just some tinkerer. He was the real deal, a genuine scientific pioneer. A label on its base read, Project Horizon Prototype 7. What is all this? I murmured as much to myself as to Ethan. Why would he hide it? Why not patent his inventions or publish his research? Ethan was examining the bookshelves, pulling out technical manuals and research journals. Based on the rumors around town, there were people who didn't want his work made public. Powerful interests who thought they owned his intellect because they had funded his early research. I turned to him surprised. That's quite specific for just town rumors. He shrugged. Did he tell you what he was working on instead? Not in detail. Just that he was developing alternative energy technology that could change the world, if he could perfect it and release it in a way that couldn't be suppressed or controlled. I approached the Project Horizon prototype, careful not to touch anything. I think this might be it. There are journals in the main garage that mention this project specifically. Ethan joined me at the workbench, his expression thoughtful. You know, there were always stories in town about Harold's garage. How the lights would be on all night, strange humming sounds, occasional power fluctuations affecting the whole block. He pointed to heavy cables running from the device to a sophisticated-looking power supply. Whatever this is, it uses a lot of energy. As we continued exploring the hidden laboratory, we found filing cabinets containing meticulously organized research notes, technical specifications, and correspondence dating back decades. One drawer was labeled Horizon, Complete Documentation, and contained what appeared to be a comprehensive record of my grandfather's work on the project. Sophia, look at this. Ethan called from a corner of the room where he'd been examining another workstation. He was holding a small device that resembled a remote control with a single button. When he pressed it, a section of the wall slid aside, revealing a large screen and what looked like recording equipment. It's some kind of media center, I said, approaching it. More than that, Ethan replied, pointing to a label on one of the devices. This is a secure video system. Military grade. He pressed another button, and the screen came to life, showing a menu of dated recordings. The most recent one was labeled, For Sophia, Final Instructions. With trembling fingers I selected it. The screen flickered, and then my grandfather's face appeared. He looked tired but determined, his familiar blue eyes serious behind his glasses. He was seated in this very laboratory, the Project Horizon prototype visible on the workbench behind him. Sophia, he began, his voice bringing unexpected tears to my eyes. If you're watching this, then you've found my workshop and hopefully my journals as well. I'm sorry for the secrecy and for placing this burden on you. But you were the only one I could trust with this legacy. He shifted slightly, adjusting his glasses in the gesture I remembered so well. What you've discovered here is the culmination of my life's work. A revolutionary method of clean energy production that could transform how we power our world. Project Horizon harnesses principles of quantum fluctuation to generate enormous amounts of energy with minimal input and zero harmful emissions or waste. My grandfather leaned forward, self-funding through strategic investments and patents on minor inventions that wouldn't attract too much attention. The prototype is nearly complete. All the theoretical work is done. All the components tested individually. What remains is the final assembly and comprehensive testing of the integrated system. His expression softened. I had hoped to finish it myself, but time is no longer on my side. My heart isn't what it used to be. And there are some problems that even the best engineering can't solve. He smiled then, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. You're probably wondering why I chose you. an artist with no scientific training for this task? The answer is simple. Because you have both the integrity and the creativity this project needs for its final phase. The technical information is all here. The how of it all. But the why and the what next? Those questions need a different kind of mind, a different kind of vision. Trust Ethan Williams if he's still in town, my grandfather continued, causing Ethan to start in surprise beside me. He has the technical background to help you understand the engineering aspects, and I vetted him thoroughly years ago. He's one of the few people in Oak Ridge who isn't connected to the corporate interests that have been monitoring my work. My grandfather's expression turned serious again. Be careful, Sophia. Robert has been trying to get information about my work for years, hoping to sell it to the highest bidder. He's connected to people at Nexus Energy Corporation who have been particularly persistent. They may approach you directly once they realize you've inherited everything. All the information you need is here in the lab, and in my journals. Take your time, understand it thoroughly, and then make your own decision about how to proceed. This technology belongs to humanity, not to corporations or governments. That's why I left it to you. Because I believe you'll understand that fundamental truth. The recording ended with my grandfather looking directly into the camera, his gaze steady and confident, leaving Ethan and me standing in stunned silence. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice hushed with a mixture of awe and concern. Well, he said. That explains a lot of the strange occurrences around town over the years. He turned to me. What are you going to do? I stared at the Project Horizon prototype, my mind reeling with the implications of what I'd just learned. My grandfather hadn't just left me a rundown garage and an old house. He'd entrusted me with what could be one of the most significant scientific breakthroughs of the century. First, I said slowly, I need to understand exactly what this technology is and how it works. Then, I took a deep breath, resolution forming within me. Then I need to figure out how to protect it from people who would misuse or suppress it. Ethan nodded, his expression serious. If what your grandfather said about Nexus Energy is true, they won't give up easily. They've been buying up alternative energy patents and startups for years, often just to shelve the technology. Then we'd better get started, I said. As we began sorting through the meticulously organized technical documentation, I felt a strange mixture of determination and anxiety. I had come to Oak Ridge expecting to find an old house and some cherished memories. Instead, I had discovered a hidden world of cutting-edge science, corporate intrigue, and a responsibility I had never anticipated. But underneath the anxiety was something else. A growing sense that perhaps this was exactly where I was meant to be. My graphic design career had stalled not because I lacked talent, but because I had been destined for something entirely different. Something my grandfather had seen in me long before I could see it in myself. The next morning, I was awakened by another knock at the door. More polite this time, but no less concerning given the events of the previous day. Ethan and I had worked late into the night, going through my grandfather's documentation and trying to understand the fundamental principles behind Project Horizon. We had barely scratched the surface of the technical information, but one thing had become abundantly clear. If the technology worked as described, it would be revolutionary. I approached the front door cautiously and peered through the peephole. Two men in expensive suits stood on the porch, both with the polished, confident appearance of corporate executives. Neither was familiar to me. Ms. Mitchell, called one of them. We'd like to speak with you about a business opportunity. Reluctantly, I opened the door, keeping the security chain engaged. Can I help you? The older of the two men smiled smoothly. Ms. Mitchell, my name is David Chambers and this is my colleague Michael Reeves. We represent Nexus Energy Corporation. He extended a business card through the gap in the door, which I took automatically. We understand you've recently inherited this property from your grandfather, Harold Mitchell. My grandfather's warning about Nexus immediately flashed through my mind. That's right, I said cautiously. What can I do for you? We'd like to discuss the possibility of purchasing the property, Chambers said. Our company had a long-standing interest in some of your grandfather's projects. We're prepared to make a very generous offer, well above market value. The property isn't for sale, I said firmly. Chambers exchanged a glance with his colleague. Perhaps we should discuss this further. May we come in? Against my better judgment, the men entered, their assessing gazes taking in every detail of the modest living room. Reeves remained standing while Chambers seated himself uninvited on the sofa. Ms. Mitchell, I'll be direct, Chambers said. We're prepared to offer you 10 times the market value of this property, approximately $2 million, for the house, the garage, and all contents. The amount was staggering enough to completely transform my financial situation and career prospects. But the very size of the offer only confirmed my suspicions about the value of what lay hidden in the garage. That's extremely generous, I said, keeping my voice neutral. May I ask why Nexus Energy is so interested in my grandfather's property? Chambers smiled thinly. Your grandfather was a brilliant man. He consulted for our company years ago on several projects. We believe some of his research notes and prototypes may still be on the premises, materials that technically belong to Nexus under the terms of his contract. It was a lie and we both knew it. According to the documentation Ethan and I had reviewed the night before, my grandfather had been meticulously careful to ensure his independent research remained his intellectual property. I see, I said. And if I'm not interested in selling? Reeves spoke for the first time, his tone considerably less pleasant than his colleagues. That would be unfortunate. Your grandfather left some unfinished business with our company. We've been very patient, but our shareholders are expecting resolution. The implied threat was clear. I met his gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated. I'm still settling in and going through my grandfather's belongings. I'm not ready to make any decisions about the property yet. We understand, Chambers said smoothly, shooting a warning glance at his colleague. It's a lot to process. But I should mention that properties in this neighborhood have been experiencing issues with code violations recently. The town has become quite strict about enforcement, particularly for structures that might be deemed unsafe. His gaze drifted meaningfully toward the window that faced the garage. Are you threatening me? I asked directly. Chambers laughed, the sound entirely devoid of humor. Not at all. Simply making an observation about local regulatory trends. Small towns can be challenging environments for outsiders. He stood, straightening his already immaculate suit. Here's my card. Our offer stands for 1 week. After that, we'll need to reassess. After they left, I leaned against the closed door, my heart racing. The encounter had been brief but deeply unsettling. These weren't just aggressive businessmen. They were prepared to use any means necessary to get what they wanted. My phone rang, startling me. The screen showed an unfamiliar local number. Hello? Sophia, it's Ethan. I'm calling from the shop. His voice was tense. Did you just have visitors? 2 men in suits. Yes, I said, surprised. How did you know? They stopped by my shop first, asking questions about Harold and whether I'd been helping his granddaughter with any technical issues. They didn't like it when I said I couldn't discuss my clients. This was alarming. How would they even know we've been working together? Small town, Ethan said grimly. Someone probably saw my truck at your place yesterday. Listen, I don't think you should stay there alone. These guys have resources, and they clearly know more than they should about what's going on. I was about to respond when my phone beeped with an incoming call. The screen showed Uncle Robert's name. Ethan, I need to take another call. Can you come by this evening? I'll be there at 6, he promised. Be careful. I switched to the incoming call. Hello, Uncle Robert. Sophia. His voice was coldly furious. I just got a very interesting call from some associates at Nexus Energy. They seem to think you found something of value in Harold's garage. So that was the connection. Your associates? Since when do you work with Nexus Energy? Don't be naive, he snapped. I've been in discussions with them about Harold's work for years. We had an understanding, when he passed, I would facilitate the transfer of his research to them for a considerable finder's fee. Except he left everything to me, I said, anger building inside me. And you didn't think to mention your corporate friends when you showed up yesterday pretending to be concerned about my welfare? I was trying to handle it within the family, Uncle Robert said defensively, to protect you from getting involved in something complicated. Harold was being ridiculous, holding on to technology that could be worth billions just because of some idealistic notion about energy for everyone. His casual dismissal of my grandfather's principles infuriated me. So you sold him out? Your own brother? I made a business decision, he corrected coldly. Something you clearly don't understand, with your impractical artistic career and financial struggles. Nexus is offering you a fortune for that property. Take it and go back to Chicago before you get in over your head. Like you did. I challenged. How much did they promise you, Uncle Robert? How much was your brother's legacy worth to you? There was a telling pause before he responded. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Nexus isn't the kind of company that takes no for an answer. If they can't buy what they want, they find other ways to get it. Is that a threat? It's a reality check, he said. I'm trying to help you, believe it or not. Take the money and walk away. Whatever Harold was working on, it's not worth risking your future over. That's where you're wrong, I said quietly. Some things are worth standing up for, even when it's difficult. Grandpa understood that. It's sad that you never did. I ended the call and sat down heavily at the kitchen table, my mind racing. The situation was escalating faster than I had anticipated. Nexus knew about the hidden laboratory, or at least suspected its existence. They had connections in town, possibly including local officials who could cause problems with building codes or property regulations. And they had been working with my uncle, who felt betrayed and angry that his expected payday was in jeopardy. Opening my laptop, I began researching Nexus Energy Corporation. Their public image was polished and progressive, a forward-thinking energy company investing in various alternative technologies. But digging deeper revealed a pattern of acquiring promising clean energy startups and technologies that subsequently disappeared from the market. Environmental groups had raised concerns about their tactics, and several former employees had filed whistleblower complaints alleging ethical violations. I was still researching when my phone chimed with a text from Ethan. Check the local news website. I navigated to the Oak Ridge Gazette's simple website and found the headline immediately. Town Council announces emergency building code enforcement initiative. The article quoted a town council member expressing grave concerns about unsafe structures that posed imminent hazards to the community. There was specific mention of outbuildings and detached garages that may have been modified without proper permits. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Nexus was already making good on their veiled threats, using local connections to apply pressure. My phone rang again, Taylor this time. Hey, I answered, relieved to hear from a friend. So, she said without preamble, I did some digging into Nexus Energy like you asked. They're seriously bad news, Sophia. They've been sued multiple times for patent infringement, and there are rumors they've used industrial espionage to acquire technology. Most of the suits were settled out of court with strict NDAs. Great, I muttered. And possibly a security system. Working on both, I assured her. Ethan's coming over tonight to help me understand more of the technical aspects of Grandpa's invention. I'm hoping we can figure out how close he was to completing it. Be careful, Taylor said, echoing Ethan's earlier warning. If this technology is as revolutionary as you think, you've discovered the truth about my work and hopefully watched the video message I prepared. What I couldn't say in that recording for security reasons is that I've left you everything you need to not only complete Project Horizon but to protect it from those who would misuse or suppress it. In the floor safe beneath the main workbench, combination 27-13-42, you'll find legal documents establishing the Harold Mitchell Foundation, a non-profit entity I created to hold the patents for this technology. I've arranged for duplicate copies to be held in secure locations that will release the information publicly if certain conditions are met. A failsafe to ensure the technology cannot be suppressed. I know this is an enormous responsibility to place on your shoulders, but watching you grow into a person of integrity and creativity, someone who values principles over profit and human welfare over personal gain, I became convinced that you were the perfect guardian for this legacy. Your Uncle Robert has been trying to get information about my work for years, hoping to sell it to Nexus Energy. Don't trust him. And be especially wary of anyone connected to Nexus. They've been monitoring my activities for decades, waiting for an opportunity to acquire my research. I believe in you, Sophia. More than you know. With love and confidence. Grandpa Harold. Tears blurred my vision as I finished reading. My grandfather had trusted me with not just his invention but with his vision for how it should benefit humanity. The weight of that responsibility was enormous, but so was the sense of purpose it gave me. I located the floor safe beneath the workbench just as the letter had described, and entered the combination. Inside, I found exactly what my grandfather had promised: legal documents establishing the Harold Mitchell Foundation, the secure drive, and additional materials including passport-style photos of myself that I had never seen before. As I examined the foundation documents, I realized my grandfather had been planning this transition for years. The legal framework was meticulous, the protections multi-layered. He had created a structure that would make it extremely difficult for any corporation or government to gain control of the technology. The sound of a car in the driveway pulled me from my thoughts, my mind racing with the implications of what I'd discovered. One thing was clear. The stakes were even higher than I had initially thought. Ethan and I worked tirelessly to understand and complete Project Horizon. The garage became our headquarters, the hidden laboratory our world. Ethan's background in engineering proved invaluable as we navigated the complex technical documentation my grandfather had left behind. "Your grandfather was a genuine genius," Ethan said one evening as we pored over schematics for the device's quantum fluctuation chamber. "This technology is at least 20 years ahead of anything on the market. Maybe more." "Can you explain it to me again?" I asked. "In terms an art school graduate might understand." Ethan smiled. "I'll try. Basically, Project Horizon taps into quantum fluctuations, tiny bursts of energy that naturally occur in what we think of as empty space. These fluctuations are happening all around us all the time, and theoretically could provide nearly limitless clean energy at a fraction of the cost of current methods. And that's why Nexus and others want to control it," I said, understanding dawning. "It could make fossil fuels and conventional power generation obsolete." "Exactly. It would completely disrupt the global energy market. Trillions of dollars in infrastructure and investment suddenly at risk of becoming obsolete." Ethan shook his head in wonder. "No wonder your grandfather was so secretive. The economic implications alone are staggering, not to mention the geopolitical impact." As we worked, we took precautions against surveillance and interference. Ethan installed a security system in both the house and garage, with cameras and motion sensors that would alert us to any intruders. The town's building inspector left a notice on my door regarding potential code violations that would require immediate inspection. A letter arrived from a law firm representing Nexus Energy, claiming ownership of intellectual property allegedly developed during my grandfather's consulting work for them. And Uncle Robert continued to call and text, alternating between veiled threats and attempts at persuasion. One particularly revealing text from him read, "You don't understand what you're dealing with. These people approached me years ago about Harold's work. They know he was developing something revolutionary, and they're determined to control it. Take the money while it's still being offered." I didn't respond to any of these pressures. Instead, I focused entirely on the task at hand, understanding and completing my grandfather's work. A breakthrough came when we discovered a series of video files documenting my grandfather's experimental process. Watching him work, explaining each step in his methodical, patient way, was both emotionally powerful and incredibly instructive. "Look at how he's calibrating the amplification matrix," Ethan pointed out during one video. "That's the step we've been struggling with." Following my grandfather's recorded instructions, we made significant progress on the final assembly and calibration of the prototype. But we were still missing something crucial: the proprietary software that would control the device's operation. "It has to be here somewhere," I said in frustration after searching through all the obvious locations. "He wouldn't have left that out. Maybe it's stored separately for security," Ethan suggested. "The most sensitive component hidden apart from everything else." That night, lying in bed unable to sleep, I remembered something from my childhood visits to my grandfather. He had always kept a collection of old hardcover books on his bedside table, classics like Moby Dick, The Count of Monte Cristo, and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. He would read them to me during my visits, his voice bringing the adventures to life. On impulse, I went to his bedroom and found the book still there, dusty but otherwise untouched. As I picked up 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, something about its weight felt off. It was too heavy even for a hardcover. Examining it more closely, I discovered that it wasn't a real book at all, but a cleverly disguised container. Inside was a solid-state drive labeled simply, Horizon OS version 7.0 Final. The next morning I showed Ethan the drive. This has to be it. The operating system for Project Horizon. We connected it to one of the laboratory computers and sure enough, it contained the complete software package needed to control the device, along with detailed installation instructions. It was the final piece we needed. For the next 3 days, we worked around the clock, following my grandfather's instructions to install the software and complete the final calibration of the prototype. It was painstaking work, requiring precise adjustments and multiple testing cycles. But gradually, the system began to respond as the documentation indicated it should. On the 4th day, as we were preparing for the initial power-up sequence, we heard vehicles pulling into the driveway. Through the security cameras Ethan had installed, we saw 3 cars, one belonging to Uncle Robert, one with town markings, and a black SUV with tinted windows. "Building inspector," Ethan said grimly. "They must think we're getting close to finishing." "We are close," Ethan confirmed. "Maybe hours away from a successful test." I made a quick decision. Keep working. Get the prototype ready for demonstration. I'll deal with them and buy you as much time as I can. Outside, I met the group in the driveway, blocking their path to the garage. Besides Uncle Robert and the building inspector, there were 2 men from the SUV who I recognized as Chambers and Reeves from Nexus, plus a 3rd man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as their attorney. "Ms. Mitchell," the building inspector began officiously. He nodded toward the building behind me. "I'm afraid this isn't a good time," I said calmly. "I'm in the middle of a major cleaning and organization project. Perhaps we could reschedule for next week." "This isn't optional, Ms. Mitchell," the inspector said, his tone hardening. "The warrant gives me authority to inspect immediately." Uncle Robert stepped forward. "Sophia, don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. We know what's in that garage. We know what Harold was working on." "Do you?" I challenged him. "Because I don't think you understand at all what Grandpa was trying to accomplish, or why he kept it from people like you." The Nexus attorney intervened smoothly. "Ms. Mitchell, we're prepared to be generous in resolving this matter, but we will pursue all legal avenues if necessary." I stood my ground. "I've reviewed my grandfather's contracts with Nexus. They pertain to specific consulting projects, all of which were completed and properly documented. Project Horizon was developed independently with his own resources on his own time." I turned to see Taylor walking up the driveway, dressed in a sharp business suit and carrying a leather portfolio. She had flown in the previous night at my request, bringing legal reinforcements. The foundation was properly established 3 years ago, and is the legal owner of all intellectual property related to Project Horizon. She handed documents to the surprised attorney. "You'll find everything in order. The foundation's purpose is to ensure that Harold Mitchell's clean energy technology is made available through open licensing for the benefit of humanity, not controlled by any single corporate entity." While the attorney was distracted with the documents, Chambers tried another approach. "Ms. Mitchell, regardless of legal ownership, the fact remains that you have an unauthorized laboratory in a residential zone. That's a clear violation of local ordinances." The building inspector nodded. "That's why I'm here. We've received specific information about modifications to the garage structure that were made without permits." "I understand your concerns," I said reasonably, "and I'm happy to address any legitimate safety issues. But first, I'd like to show you something that might put things in perspective." At that moment, my phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "Ready when you are." I smiled at the assembled group. "Gentlemen, you've all been very concerned about what's happening in that garage. Why don't I show you exactly what my grandfather was working on? Then we can discuss the best path forward." They followed me to the garage, their expressions ranging from suspicious to triumphant. Uncle Robert in particular looked smug, clearly believing that his corporate allies were about to take control of the technology he had coveted for so long. Inside the main garage area, I led them through to the hidden laboratory where Ethan waited beside the completed Project Horizon prototype. The device now hummed softly, its control panel displaying a series of steady green lights. "Gentlemen," I announced, "this is Project Horizon, a revolutionary clean energy technology developed by Dr. Harold Mitchell. It generates electricity by amplifying quantum fluctuations, producing no waste, consuming no fuel, and creating no pollution." Chambers stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the device with naked ambition. "This is exactly what we've been looking for. Nexus Energy would be the perfect partner to bring this to market." "That's not going to happen," I said firmly. "As my friend just explained, this technology belongs to the Harold Mitchell Foundation, which is committed to making it available through open licensing." Taylor interjected. "The foundation's structure, which has already been legally established and funded, makes that decision binding." The building inspector, who had been examining the laboratory with growing amazement, cleared his throat. "This is not what I was told to expect. This looks like a professional research facility, not a dangerous amateur workshop." "It is professional," Ethan confirmed, "built to exceed all relevant safety codes and standards." Dr. Mitchell was meticulous about safety. "There's something else you should know," I added, addressing the entire group but looking directly at the Nexus representatives. "My grandfather established a dead man switch protocol. If anything happens to me, or if any attempt is made to seize this technology by force or legal manipulation, complete documentation of Project Horizon will be automatically released to the public domain, along with evidence of Nexus's attempts to suppress it." This was a calculated bluff based on hints in my grandfather's letters, but the reaction from Chambers and Reeves told me it had hit home. They exchanged alarmed glances. "That's ridiculous," Chambers blustered. "You're making threats based on a technology you barely understand." "Let's find out," I suggested calmly. "Ethan, would you demonstrate the prototype?" Ethan nodded and initiated the activation sequence we had perfected over the past week. The device's hum deepened, and a display screen showed rapidly increasing energy output levels. Then, dramatically, he unplugged the device from its power source, and it continued to run, now generating more energy than it had initially consumed. "The device is now producing clean electricity without any external power input," Ethan explained. "It's completely self-sustaining and could theoretically continue indefinitely. The energy can be directed to power anything from a single home to an entire community, depending on the scale of implementation." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Even Uncle Robert seemed to grasp the magnitude of what he was witnessing. "This changes everything," the building inspector said quietly. "The whole energy paradigm." "That's exactly what my grandfather intended," I said. "And that's why he was so determined to protect it from those who might restrict its availability for profit or control, triggering the release of all documentation to the public domain, which would render your legal maneuvers pointless. Or you can work with the Harold Mitchell Foundation under its open licensing framework, positioning Nexus as a leader in implementing this new technology, rather than suppressing it." Chambers and the attorney stepped aside for a hushed conversation. When they returned, their demeanor had shifted noticeably. "We would be interested in discussing cooperative arrangement with the Foundation," Chambers said stiffly. "Nexus Energy has the infrastructure to help implement this technology on a global scale." "I'm sure the Foundation's board would be open to those discussions," Taylor said smoothly, "as long as the core principle of open access is maintained." As the meeting continued, with Taylor expertly guiding the conversation toward a resolution that would protect Project Horizon, while allowing for its proper implementation, I stepped aside with Uncle Robert. "You sold out Grandpa for money," I said quietly. "Your own brother." He had the grace to look ashamed. I didn't understand what he was trying to accomplish. I just saw a valuable technology being wasted. "It wasn't being wasted," I corrected him. "It was being protected until it could be shared properly. There's a difference between value and price." "Uncle Robert, Grandpa understood that, even if you never did." Over the next few days, events moved rapidly. With Taylor's legal expertise, We formalized the Harold Mitchell Foundation's control of Project Horizon and established preliminary agreements with multiple entities, including a Chasen Nexus Energy, for implementation of the technology under strict open access provisions. The town building inspector, impressed by both the technology and its potential impact on the community, became an unlikely ally, helping to navigate local regulations and eventually proposing that Oak Ridge become a pilot site for the first municipal implementation of Project Horizon. And as news of the technology began to spread through carefully managed channels, scientists and engineers from around the world reached out, eager to contribute to its refinement and deployment. My grandfather's vision of an energy revolution shared by all of humanity was beginning to take shape. Through it all, I found myself growing into a role I had never anticipated. Not just as the inheritor of my grandfather's work, but as the guardian and champion of his vision. My background in design, which had seemed so impractical to my parents, proved unexpectedly valuable as I worked to communicate complex technical concepts to diverse audiences and visualize implementation strategies. One evening, as Ethan and I sat on the porch of what was now decisively my home, watching the sunset over the small town that had become the unlikely epicenter of an energy revolution, he asked the question that had been on both our minds. Do you think he planned all this? Not just the technology, but everything that's happened since. I thought about it, remembering my grandfather's twinkling eyes and the quiet confidence he had always shown in me, even when I doubted myself. I think he hoped, I said finally. He created the conditions for success and trusted that the right people would make the right choices when the time came. I smiled at Ethan, whose technical expertise and unwavering support had been crucial to our success. He was good at seeing potential in people, even when they couldn't see it themselves. What had begun as a simple inheritance, an old house and a dilapidated garage, had become something far greater. A legacy of innovation, integrity, and hope for a better future. And somewhere, surrounded by a crowd far larger than the small town had ever hosted, journalists from major news outlets jostled for position alongside energy industry representatives, environmental activists, and curious locals. Behind me stood a scaled-up version of Project Horizon, ready for its first public demonstration. The journey to this moment had been challenging and, at times, dangerous. Nexus Energy had initially appeared to accept our terms, agreeing to work within the open licensing framework established by the Harold Mitchell Foundation. But within weeks, they had launched a multi-pronged attack, legal challenges to the foundation structure, a PR campaign questioning the technology's safety. A break-in at the garage triggered the security system Harold had presciently installed years earlier, sending the intruders fleeing before they could reach the laboratory. Anonymous threats arrived by email, and in a particularly alarming development, we discovered surveillance devices planted in the trees surrounding the property. But my grandfather had prepared for such resistance. The legal documentation establishing the foundation was ironclad, drafted by top intellectual property attorneys and reinforced with provisions specifically designed to withstand corporate challenges. The dead man switch I had bluffed about turned out to be real. A secure server program to release complete documentation of Project Horizon to the public domain if certain triggering events occurred. Scientists who had worked with him during his government days came forward to validate his research and defend his reputation against smear attempts. Environmental organizations rallied to support the technology, mobilizing public opinion in favor of its open release. And most unexpectedly, without lawyers or corporate allies, looking tired and unusually subdued, "I've been doing some thinking," he said after I reluctantly invited him in. About Harold, about what he was trying to accomplish, and about my own part in all this. He pulled out a folder and placed it on the kitchen table. These are copies of all my communications with Nexus over the years. Emails, meeting notes, financial arrangements. Everything. I stared at him, suspicious. "Why would you give me this?" "Because they used me," he said simply. I thought I was being clever, positioning myself to profit from Harold's work. But I was just a tool to them, a way to get information about his research. They never intended to honor their promises to me, any more than they intend to honor their agreements with the Foundation. His expression was haunted. 2 days ago, I overheard a conversation between Chambers and another executive. They were discussing contingency plans if legal methods failed to secure the technology. Plans that included, he hesitated, making problems disappear permanently. I felt a chill at his words. They threatened you? Not directly. They don't know I heard them. But the implications were clear. He pushed the folder closer to me. Use this however you need to. It won't make up for what I did, but maybe it can help protect Harold's legacy. And you. With Taylor's help, we used it to secure a temporary restraining order against the company, buying crucial time to organize the public demonstration that was now about to begin. Who had finally come to visit after months of skepticism about my impulsive move to the middle of nowhere. Their initial dismissal had gradually transformed into cautious support, as they realized the significance of what I had undertaken. Ethan stood beside me on the stage, along with Taylor and a team of independent scientists who had verified Project Horizon's functionality and safety. My voice carrying across the unexpectedly quiet crowd. My grandfather, Dr. Harold Mitchell, spent the last 30 years of his life developing what you see behind me, a technology he believed could transform our relationship with energy and, by extension, with our planet and each other. I gestured to the device. Project Horizon harnesses quantum fluctuations, energy that exists naturally all around us, and amplifies it into a stable, usable power source. Consumes no fuel. Many had remained skeptical about such extraordinary claims. You don't have to take my word for it, I continued. Their complete reports are available on the Harold Mitchell Foundation website, along with detailed technical documentation that will allow engineers worldwide to understand and implement this technology. I nodded to Ethan, who stepped forward to the control panel. For this demonstration, we've connected Project Horizon to Oak Ridge's power grid, with the cooperation of local utilities. What you're about to witness is the activation of a clean energy source capable of powering this entire town indefinitely, at a fraction of the cost of conventional methods. Ethan initiated the startup sequence. The device hummed to life, its control panels illuminating with a series of green indicators. On a large display visible to the crowd, it's currently generating enough electricity to power approximately 100 homes. At full capacity, this single unit could provide for the entire town of Oak Ridge. On cue, the town mayor stepped forward and flipped a ceremonial switch, transitioning a portion of the town's power supply to the Project Horizon output. The street lights around the square, which had been turned off for the demonstration, came back on to applause from the crowd. This is just the beginning, I continued once the excitement had quieted. As my grandfather did, that access to clean, affordable energy should be a right, not a privilege controlled by any corporation or government. As I spoke, I saw movement at the back of the crowd. 2 black SUVs had pulled up, and men in suits were emerging, Chambers and Reeves among them. But before they could approach the stage, they were intercepted by federal agents who had been monitoring the event, based on the evidence of corporate malfeasance we had provided. The demonstration continued without interruption, with technical experts explaining the principles behind Project Horizon and answering questions from journalists and industry representatives. The live feed was being watched by millions around the world, ensuring that the technology could never again be suppressed or controlled by any single entity. Looking out over the scene, this is exactly what he wanted: the technology in the open, beyond anyone's ability to contain it. It still feels surreal, I admitted. 6 months ago, I was a struggling graphic designer worried about making rent. Now I'm directing a foundation that's distributing revolutionary energy technology to the world. You were the right choice, Ethan said with conviction. Harold knew that. Over the following weeks, the impact of Project Horizon's public release spread like ripples in a pond. Our small prototype became the centerpiece of a growing research center dedicated to refining and expanding the technology's applications. Uncle Robert, in an unexpected turn, became one of the Foundation's most dedicated advocates, using his business connections to promote adoption of the technology in industries that had initially resisted the change. The house and garage that had once seemed like an unwanted burden became the heart of a thriving community of innovators and idealists. The dilapidated exterior of the garage was preserved as a reminder of my grandfather's deliberate humility and secrecy, while the laboratory inside was expanded and updated to serve as a research and education center. My parents, initially skeptical of my decision to abandon city life for a small-town inheritance, we thought his simplicity was a limitation, not a choice. We couldn't see what was beneath the surface. A year after the public demonstration, his kind eyes and gentle smile captured perfectly by an artist friend. Beneath it was a simple plaque with his favorite quote: "The future belongs to those who give the next generation reason to hope." The journey that had begun with a seemingly worthless inheritance had transformed not just my life, but potentially the lives of millions around the world. The garage that everyone had dismissed as junk had contained perhaps the most valuable treasure of all. Not just a revolutionary technology, but a vision of a more equitable and sustainable world. When the day's work was done and the facility emptied, I sometimes sat alone in what had been his private workspace, now preserved exactly as he had left it. I could almost feel his presence, his quiet determination, his unwavering belief that one person with conviction could change the course of history. "I hope I've done right by you, Grandpa," I would whisper into the silence. And somehow, in the humming of the machines and the soft glow of the monitors, I could almost hear his answer: "You've done better than I ever dreamed possible." But potentially the future of energy for our entire world. Sometimes the most transformative legacies come disguised as the most ordinary things. If you've enjoyed this story of unexpected discovery and standing up for what's right, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories of everyday people facing extraordinary circumstances. And remember, sometimes the most valuable treasures are hidden in the places we least expect to find them.